Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you guys with the most up-to-date political, economic and geostrategic analysis on the world's number 2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. Okay, happy Friday everybody. Let's start today's video with US-China relations. This week we have more information on the so-called Taiwan Advanced Resilience Act 2022, which is included in the annual National Defense Authorization Act in the US. That will likely pass and be signed into law before the end of this year. The compromise version of the bill, which has been in negotiation for several months now, does not include the more provocative provisions initially proposed, like, for example, referring to Taiwan as a major non-NATO ally, or a sanctions trigger in the event of a, quote, significant escalation in aggression, end quote, against Taiwan by Beijing. However, the bill does feature $10 billion in spending for Taiwan's defense, authorizing appropriations for military grant assistance for Taiwan up to $2 billion per year from 2023 through 2027, if the US Secretary of State certifies that Taiwan has increased its defense spending. Taiwan's weapons procurement will also be fast-tracked, and training and collaboration will be enhanced, according to the bill in its current form. The law, if passed, would also establish a new task force, quote, to counter China's economic coercion against countries that increase their ties or support for Taiwan, and directs the Secretary of State to submit a strategy for responding to and providing assistance to countries impacted by economic coercion, end quote. On the technology front, more specifically the semiconductor front in the US-China relationship, US media is reporting this week that US senators have scaled back a proposal that places new curbs on the use of Chinese-made chips by the US government and its contractors, amid pushback from trade groups like the US Chamber of Commerce. The proposal, unveiled in September, that would have required US federal agencies and their contractors to stop using semiconductors manufactured in the Chinese mainland, now no longer forbids contractors from using the targeted chips and pushes the compliance deadline for other measures back to 5 years from the initial 2-year implementation deadline seen in the first version. Meanwhile, Taiwan's advanced chip maker TSMC has announced that it will be tripling its Arizona chip investment. The company originally set the technology level back in 2020 at its Phoenix site at 5 nanometers. That was an advance over most chips at the time, but behind the level that TSMC would produce in Taiwan by 2024, when the US factory was set to open. The new plan would upgrade the factory to use 4 nanometer technology, which Apple was first to adopt. The second factory, expected to begin operating in 2026 in Arizona, will be able to produce 3 nanometer chips. This is a win for the United States in the global great game of semiconductor control, but it is a small win. If these investment plans are implemented, the production of US-made chips they could provide to customers would be maybe 15% of the total. TSMC still has much more capacity and much more advanced fabs in Taiwan itself. As such, the Phoenix site will not insulate US customers from supply chain risk in the case of a full Taiwan disruption. Now, while we are here on US-China relations, it is worth reminding ourselves once again how key US policymakers are articulating the US position on China. Of course, we know the relationship has devolved into one of mutual mistrust and antagonism, but it's also important from time to time to examine the composition of the trees within the greater forest. So let's briefly examine a few recent statements from US officials. This first statement is from Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman at the 4th high-level meeting of the US-EU dialogue on China. Quote, I think it's safe to say that the US and the EU have never been more aligned on our approach to the Indo-Pacific as a whole and to the People's Republic of China. We bear no illusions about the PRC, but we will do our part to ensure that any competition never veers into conflict. We will keep engaging with the PRC, so we understand each other clearly, but we will not stay silent when the PRC behaves provocatively in the South and East China Sea, when it violates the rights of ethnic and religious minorities in Tibet and Xinjiang, when it engages in economic coercion, or when it takes threatening steps in the Taiwan Strait. End quote. And on that last point, at a separate event, Ms. Sherman, in response to a question from a university student, expressed that she believes that a war over Taiwan is very possible, saying, quote, "I think war is potentially possible because Xi Jinping now has absolute control in China, so our effort is to deter that, to urge China not to go in that direction, but also to support Taiwan to have the means to defend itself." End quote. Now, for the next US official, at a recent US university-hosted event, the director of the FBI defended the Bureau's investigations of Chinese academics suspected of criminal improprieties. In response to a question, he expressed, quote, "We do not base our cases on race, ethnicity, or national origin, and we haven't. The Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, is engaged in what it considers an international talent war to try to leverage and steal intellectual property and sensitive research and data from countries all over the world. And so it's part of our responsibility to work with universities to try to help protect that information." End quote. Adding that, quote, "It's important to understand hidden relationships US-based academics and researchers may have with Chinese universities, especially if the academics are conducting research funded by American taxpayers." End quote. And the final statement is from the US Commerce Secretary during a big speech at MIT called "US Competitiveness and the Chinese Challenge." The speech especially gives us a clear articulation of US policy direction and intent in relation to the escalating technology and trade competition between it and China. Quote, "We believe there are three families of technologies that will be of particular importance over the coming decade. First, computing-related technologies, including microelectronics, quantum information systems, and artificial intelligence. Second, biotechnologies and biomanufacturing. And third, clean energy technologies. We will continue to take action to protect our advantage and maintain as large a lead as possible in these fundamental technologies." The decisions of universities and companies today on where and how they undertake research, engage in trade, and make investment decisions will profoundly shape our economic and national security for decades to come. And I would note that MIT's recently released China Strategy report on research integrity and collaboration with PRC partners is an example of the type of initiative we need to help inform our policy and chart a sensible path forward. We are not seeking the decoupling of our economy from that of China's. We want to promote trade and investment in areas that do not threaten our core economic and national security interests or human rights values." End quote. Okay, now let's leave North America and head back across the Pacific to China, which is currently accelerating its reopening and preparing for a wave of COVID infections. Hey guys, if you're enjoying this episode, don't forget to hit that like button, and if you have not subscribed yet and you do think there is some value with these episodes, maybe consider subscribing, hit that bell notification, and you'll have the latest developments as they're released. And as always, anyone who can go that extra mile and help keep the channel financially sustainable, it's just me who makes these, and hopefully one day I'd like to transition to doing this channel as a full-time job. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are in the description below. As always, thank you so much everybody for the ongoing support. Next up, the PRC's reopening is likely going to be the most important China story for at least the next few months. The reopening and how it is managed is going to touch on every aspect of the country and force policymakers to react to political, social, healthcare, and economic challenges in real time. And here on China Update, we will be following it all too in real time. Yesterday, Thursday, China's National Health Commission issued a plan that enables residents to use store-bought tests and advised that residents who tested positive could choose to quarantine themselves at home. State media too is now strongly urging infected people to stay at home and rest. On Thursday, at a press conference of the Joint Prevention and Control Body of the State Council, Wang Guiqiang, director of the Infectious Diseases Department of Peking University First Hospital, expressed, quote, "Most people infected with COVID-19 can be treated at home, and only a small number of people infected with severe underlying diseases may need to see a doctor in a medical institution." End quote. If some viewers are feeling a sense of whiplash with these official statements, they are not the only ones. Some Chinese netizens have been critical of the sudden official narrative shift on COVID. Epidemiologist and health official Liang Wennian has been a popular target of this online criticism. Yesterday, screenshots of his previous messaging briefly trended on Chinese social media. The screenshots contrasted what Liang said this week about COVID being almost harmless to remarks that were made back in April when he said the death rate was 7 to 8 times greater than that of the flu, and that relaxations, quote, will result in many serious illnesses and deaths. End quote. And speaking of trending, the hashtag #GoodbyeHealthCode became a top trending hashtag on Weibo yesterday, reaching over 660 million clicks by 10 p.m. local time. What this tells us about public sentiment towards the health code system specifically, and zero COVID generally, I think speaks for itself. This week, as we have been seeing reopening and loosening of measures, cases too have been rising sharply. The situation in Beijing is already looking messy. One Beijing-based doctor speaking to a British media outlet expressed, quote, "Fever clinics are a total mess." End quote. The doctor is advising patients to stay at home instead of seeking medical treatment. Another doctor reportedly expressed, quote, "The hospital is sending doctors from other departments to work shifts at the fever clinic. Everyone is working 24 hours straight, resting for 24 hours, then returning for another shift." End quote. There are now dozens of unverified reports across the capital city of entire residential communities positive with cases, with official numbers dramatically undercounting cases. However, despite this, as we speak, officials are preparing themselves for a tidal wave of infections to wash over the country. On Wednesday, in a speech reported by the state-run China Youth Daily, the former deputy head of the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention predicted that as much as 90% of the population could eventually be infected with COVID, putting well over 1 billion people at risk. Quote, "According to mathematical models, when the first wave of large-scale shocks reaches its peak, the infection rate in our population may reach about 60% and then gradually fall back to plateau, and eventually 80 to 90% of us may experience infection." End quote. With this in mind, it's fitting to end this video with this simple observation made by veteran China analyst Bill Bishop just today. Quote, "Let's hope that the PRC experts are correct that the vast majority of people will be fine. Otherwise, the next few months are going to be awful." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Hope you have a wonderful day wherever you are, and I will see you all tomorrow.